They gave me 7 days to vacate my own ranch, or they'd sell it from under me. 7 days. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of that demand still makes my blood boil, even now, thinking back on it. What this pack of suburban wolves, led by their self-appointed queen, didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have fathomed in their wildest, power-tripping dreams, was that their precious, manicured little kingdom, right down to the oversized beige McMansion their HOA president, Brenda, called home, was built entirely on my land. Oh, this is a good one, folks. You're going to want to hear this. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because the tale of how I dismantled an HOA with nothing but a few dusty deeds and a righteous fire in my belly is something you won't soon forget. It all started, as these things often do, with a fence. Not even my fence, mind you, but the idea of one. My ranch, a sprawling couple of 100 acres of rolling hills, ancient oaks, and a meandering creek, had been in my family for 3 generations. It was my sanctuary, my retreat from a long career as a land use attorney in the city, a place where the loudest noise was usually the wind in the pines or the distant lowing of my tenant farmers' cattle. The closest edge of the Willow Creek Estates OA development abutted the southern stretch of my property line, a line clearly demarcated by a crumbling, generations-old stone wall and a survey recorded long before any of their cookie-cutter houses were even a gleam in a developer's eye. For years we'd coexisted, if not amicably, then at least distantly. I kept to my side, they kept to theirs, mostly. Then Brenda arrived on the scene, elected HOA president on a platform of beautification and order, which apparently translated to making everyone else's life hell. Brenda, whose real name was probably something innocuous like Susan, but radiated such an aggressive aura of entitlement, she was universally, if privately, known as Brenda the Terrible. She drove a pristine, pearl-white Cadillac Escalade, the kind that always seemed to be judging your own, more practical vehicle. Her hair was a helmet of blonde ambition, her outfit screamed expensive but devoid of personality, and her smile was a predatory baring of teeth. The first sign of trouble was a politely worded yet unmistakably passive-aggressive letter regarding the rustic nature of my property line. It suggested that the old stone wall was an eyesore and that perhaps I should consider replacing it with something more in keeping with community standards, like a 6-foot vinyl privacy fence. I chuckled, filed it under circular, and ignored it. My land wasn't in their community. The letters escalated. They started citing HOA bylaws that had absolutely no jurisdiction over my property. Then came the fines for unmaintained vegetation near the property line. It was a wildflower meadow, for crying out loud. For the dilapidated state of an old tractor I kept under a lien, too well within my boundaries. It was a family heirloom. And my personal favorite, excessive natural debris, which I think referred to fallen leaves. Each letter was signed with Brenda's flourishing, self-important signature. I sent a curt, legally precise letter back, clarifying my property boundaries, citing the relevant county records, and politely telling them to stick their bylaws where the sun doesn't shine. I even included a copy of the official survey map. I assumed that, faced with actual facts, any rational person would back down. I had, it turned out, grossly overestimated Brenda's capacity for rationality. She saw my factual rebuttal not as a correction, but as a challenge to her authority. Her little fiefdom was being questioned, and she couldn't have that. The situation simmered for a few months. I'd see Brenda occasionally, driving slowly past my gate, her gaze lingering on my long, unpaved driveway and the dense woods that shielded my house from view. She looked like a predator sizing up prey. One of my older neighbors, a quiet woman named Mrs. Henderson, who lived on the edge of the HOA and had once confided in me about Brenda's reign of terror over lawn ornaments, warned me. "She's got a bee in her bonnet about your place, dear," she'd said over a shared cup of tea. "Thinks it brings down the tone. She told the board she's going to resolve the situation. Be careful." I thanked her, but I wasn't overly concerned. What could they possibly do? I owned my land outright, or so I thought, in the conventional sense. The final escalation came swiftly and with breathtaking arrogance. It was a thick envelope, delivered by certified mail. Inside, nestled amongst a sheaf of nonsensical HOA violation notices, was a letter printed on heavy, ostentatious letterhead. It stated that due to my continued refusal to comply with community standards and my failure to rectify numerous and severe breaches of HOA covenants, the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association had voted to take remedial action. This action, it detailed, involved them assuming temporary stewardship of a 50-foot deep section of my ranch adjoining their development, effectively seizing it to abate the nuisances. And then, the kicker. If I did not fully remediate all violations across my entire property to their satisfaction within 7 days and pay an astronomical sum in accumulated fines and administrative fees, they would initiate proceedings to sell the entirety of the Parker Ranch at public auction to recover costs and ensure future compliance. My jaw, I think, literally dropped. Sell my ranch? My family's legacy? Because Brenda didn't like my wildflowers? The sheer, unmitigated gall was astounding. It was patently illegal, of course, laughably so. But the threat, however empty legally, was clearly intended to intimidate. They thought I was just some old recluse who'd roll over. They had no idea who they were dealing with, or more importantly, the ground upon which their own little houses of cards were built. My initial shock morphed into a cold, clear fury. This wasn't just an overreach, it was a declaration of war. And Brenda, bless her cotton socks, had just handed me the map to her entire arsenal. The 7-day ultimatum was ticking, but the first thing I did wasn't panic. It was to retrieve a very old, very battered tin box from the back of my father's filing cabinet. This box contained generations of Parker family documents, deeds, surveys, correspondence, diaries. My grandfather, a taciturn man with a deep love for this land and an equally deep suspicion of encroaching suburbia, had been meticulous. I glanced through some of it over the years, mostly out of historical curiosity. Now, I was looking for something specific, a half-forgotten story he used to tell about the original land deal for the development that became Willow Creek Estates. He'd always finished it with a wry chuckle and the words, "They think they bought it, but they only ever borrowed it." I dismissed it as colorful exaggeration, the grumbling of an old rancher. Now I wondered, as a retired land use attorney, my brain, even after years of peaceful disuse in that particular arena, began to click back into its old familiar patterns of research and analysis. I spread the oldest, most fragile documents out on my large oak dining table, the scent of aged paper and ink filling the air. There were deeds written in elegant, spidery script, bearing seals and stamps from a bygone era, survey maps drawn by hand with intricate measurements and notes in faded brown ink. And then I found it. Not one document, but a series of them, cross-referenced with notations in my grandfather's distinct hand. It wasn't a sale, it was a lease, an incredibly long one, 99 years. To be precise, granted by my great-grandfather to a development company back in the early 1920s for a specific parcel of what was then the far southern pasture of the ranch. The lease payments, substantial at the time, had been made for a few decades. Then, it seemed, records grew spotty. The original development company had gone bankrupt during the Depression, its assets sold and resold multiple times. Subsequent developers, it appeared, had built Willow Creek Estates based on incomplete or, dare I say, conveniently misinterpreted title work, assuming outright ownership from those later, murkier transactions. The 99-year lease, however, had a very clear expiration date. And that date, according to the original, impeccably preserved document, had passed almost 5 years ago. My heart began to pound, not with fear, but with a dawning, electrifying realization. If this was correct, if the lease had indeed expired and was never renegotiated, or the land properly sold by my family in the interim, and my grandfather's meticulous record showed no such sale, then Willow Creek Estates, Refor section sale and a vine of line. Every last McMansion, every manicured lawn, every petunia-lined pathway, including Brenda's palatial residence, was sitting on land that had reverted to the Parker Ranch. To me, the sheer, delicious irony of it was almost too much to bear. The HOA, in its boundless arrogance, was threatening to sell my ranch while unknowingly squatting on a significant portion of it. My grandfather hadn't been grumbling, he'd been stating a legal fact. They only ever borrowed it, he'd said, and the loan, it seemed, was long overdue. I spent the next 2 days in a whirlwind of focused activity. First, A trip to the county records office, a place I knew like the back of my hand from my professional days. The head clerk, Mr. Olligords of Plester Clerk. Abernathy, a man whose tenure there rivaled the age of some of the documents he curated, greeted me with a warm smile. Eleanor Parker, haven't seen you in these hallowed halls for a dog's age. What brings a high-powered city lawyer like yourself back to our dusty archives? He chuckled. I explained I was retired but working on a personal historical matter. With his help, I cross-referenced everything. The original lease agreement was there, properly recorded. Subsequent deeds for the Willow Creek plots? They showed a chain of title originating from the lessee, not the original Parker fee simple ownership. There was no record of the Parkers ever formally subdividing and selling that leased portion after the original lease was established. It was as if, through incompetence or deliberate oversight across multiple transactions and decades, the crucial fact of the underlying leased reversionary interest had been buried, forgotten, or ignored. Until now, the smoking gun wasn't just one document, but the glaring absence of a superseding one. The chain of title for Willow Creek was built on sand. To be absolutely certain, I contacted my old law partner, Julian Vance, a man whose mind was as sharp as a tack and whose discretion was legendary. I faxed him copies of the key documents, keeping my explanation brief and carefully neutral. His call came within hours. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a mixture of incredulity and professional excitement, "if these documents are what they appear to be, and your family never formally sold or re-leased that parcel after the original lease term expired, well, darling, you don't just have a defense against your overzealous HOA. You appear to own the ground beneath their feet." He paused, then added with a dry chuckle, "This is beyond poetic, it's biblical. You could, quite literally, smite them." The confirmation sent a surge of adrenaline through me. I wasn't just going to defend my ranch, I was going to turn the tables so completely that Brenda and her cronies wouldn't know what hit them. The 7-day clock was still ticking down, a fact that I'm sure filled Brenda with smug satisfaction. Let her. Every tick was a step closer to her own reckoning. I now possessed knowledge that was, in suburban warfare terms, a tactical nuke, and I was more than prepared to deploy it. The question was no longer if I would fight back, but how spectacularly I would win. The thought of Brenda's face when she realized the monumental scale of her miscalculation was a powerful motivator. Her attempt to steal a sliver of my land was about to cost her, and her entire HOA, everything. With 4 days left on Brenda's arbitrary and utterly baseless deadline, I could almost feel the smug anticipation radiating from Willow Creek Estates. I imagined Brenda at her HOA meetings, probably preening about how she was finally going to deal with the unruly Parker Ranch. Let her. I was using the time wisely. Julian, my old law partner, had connected me with a younger, incredibly sharp litigator from his firm, a woman named Sarah Chen, who specialized in complex property disputes and, as Julian put it, ate bullies like Brenda for breakfast. Sarah was, to put it mildly, thrilled by the case. "This," she'd said during our first video call, her eyes gleaming, "is the kind of case lawyers dream about. The sheer, unmitigated arrogance of this HOA is a thing of beauty, and the leverage you hold is, well, it's exquisite." Together, we meticulously prepared our counteroffensive. It wasn't just about defending against their ludicrous claim on my ranch. It was about asserting my rightful ownership of the land they occupied. We drafted cease and desist letters, not for them to stop harassing me about my ranch, but for them to vacate my property, the land their homes were built on. We prepared notices of trespass and intent to file for ejectment. The beauty of it was that Brenda, in her attempt to strong-arm me with HOA bylaws, had inadvertently confirmed the exact boundaries of the land they were occupying, land that, unbeknownst to her, was mine. Her own exhibits, attached to her threatening letter, detailed the plots and common areas of Willow Creek Estates, all falling neatly within the historical boundaries of the expired 99-year lease from the Parker Ranch master parcel. She'd literally handed us the map to her own destruction. During those few days, I made a point of being visible, but unconcerned. I pottered in my garden, took long walks along my actual property lines, and even waved cheerfully if I happened to see Brenda's Escalade cruising slowly past my gate. I wanted her to think I was oblivious, perhaps even cowed. The less she suspected, the harder she would fall. Mrs. Henderson called, her voice hushed with worry. Brenda was at the clubhouse yesterday, she whispered. She told everyone she's having a special community update meeting on Friday evening. That's the day your week is up. She said she'll be announcing the successful resolution of the Parker Ranch issue and outlining the HOA's plans for the beautification of the acquired frontage. She sounded so triumphant. Friday evening. Perfect. A public forum for her humiliation. I thanked Mrs. Henderson for the intelligence, a small smile playing on my lips. The irony was almost painful. Brenda, planning to announce her victory over me, while standing on land I legally owned. It was like watching a villain meticulously set up their own banana peel. Sarah and I decided to let their deadline arrive. We wouldn't send our notices prematurely. No, the reveal had to be timed for maximum impact. Let Brenda have her moment of perceived glory. Let her outline her grand plans for my land. The higher she climbed on her pedestal of arrogance, the more satisfying her inevitable tumble would be. The enablers on the HOA board, I mused, were probably a mix of the ignorant, the intimidated, and the genuinely malicious, those who reveled in Brenda's power because it reflected onto them. I'd seen their names on the letters, a timid-looking treasurer who probably just rubber stamped whatever Brenda put in front of him, a puffed-up secretary who likely enjoyed the petty authority. They were all complicit in this attempt to unlawfully seize my property. They would all share in the consequences of their leader's hubris. On Thursday, the day before Brenda's community update, a tow truck, accompanied by a smug-looking man in an HOA-logoed polo shirt, actually pulled up to my main gate. He had a work order to remove my dilapidated old tractor. I met him at the gate, my expression one of mild surprise. "I think there's been a mistake," I said calmly. "This is private property. You have no authority here." The man, clearly one of Brenda's acolytes, puffed out his chest. "Got a work order from the HOA, ma'am. This vehicle's been cited multiple times." I simply pointed to the no trespassing signs, then to the sturdy lock on the gate. "If you attempt to enter my property, I will call the sheriff and have you arrested for trespassing and attempted theft. I suggest you consult with your employers before you commit a criminal act." He blustered for a moment, made a call on his cell phone, presumably to Brenda, who I imagined was frothing at the other end, and then, deflated, instructed the tow truck driver to leave. It was a small victory, a minor skirmish before the main event, but it was satisfying. It also confirmed Brenda's unwavering commitment to her illegal course of action. She was clearly not backing down. Excellent. The stage was perfectly set. Friday couldn't come soon enough. I felt a grim satisfaction, the same kind I used to feel when a particularly odious opposing counsel was about to walk into a perfectly laid legal trap. Brenda thought she was the hunter. She had no idea she was the prey, and the snare was about to snap shut. Friday evening arrived, cloaked in the kind of late summer humidity that makes everything feel sticky and tense. The Willow Creek Estates Community Clubhouse, a building that looked like a bloated beige version of a southern plantation manor, was buzzing with activity. Lights blazed, cars filled the parking lot, a veritable sea of late-model SUVs and sedans. According to Mrs. Henderson, who'd given me a discreet call earlier, attendance was high. Brenda had apparently whipped up considerable anticipation for her grand announcement. Sarah Chen, my lawyer, met me at the end of my driveway. She was impeccably dressed in a sharp navy suit, carrying a leather briefcase that I knew contained our arsenal of documents. She had an air of calm, focused intensity that I found immensely reassuring. "Ready to go fishing, Eleanor?" she asked with a slight smile. "I believe the term is shooting fish in a barrel, Sarah," I replied, feeling a surge of predatory glee myself. "And Brenda has kindly lined them all up for us." We drove my old, reliable pickup truck, a deliberate contrast to the gleaming luxury vehicles dominating the HOA clubhouse lot. We parked a little way off, not wanting to announce our presence prematurely. We could hear the murmur of the crowd from inside. Showtime. We timed our entrance perfectly. Brenda was already at the podium, basking in the glow of the spotlights and the attention of the assembled residents. She was in her element, dressed in a particularly vibrant fuchsia pantsuit that seemed to scream, "Look at me." Her voice, amplified by the microphone, dripped with self-congratulation. And so, after exhausting every possible avenue of polite negotiation, she was saying, her tone conveying a deep put-upon sigh, and faced with blatant disregard for our community standards and property values, your HOA board was left with no choice but to take decisive action regarding the deplorable state of the adjacent Parker Ranch. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. I saw a few familiar faces, the timid treasurer, the puffed-up secretary, all looking suitably grave and important on the dais behind her. As of today, Brenda continued, her voice rising triumphantly, the 7-day remediation period has expired. The necessary steps have been initiated to rectify the situation permanently. She paused for dramatic effect, a smug smile playing on her lips. In short, Willow Creek Estates will soon be expanding its beautiful, well-maintained environment, and the long-standing eyesore on our southern border will be a thing of the past. A smattering of applause broke out. This was our cue. Sarah and I walked calmly down the center aisle. Heads turned, the applause faltered. A hush fell over the room as Brenda, mid-smirk, caught sight of us. Her eyes narrowed, the smile freezing on her face. "Well, well," she said, her voice tight with surprise and irritation. "Look who decided to show up, Mrs. Parker. A little late to plead your case, don't you think?" I approached the side of the stage, Sarah a step behind me. "Actually, Brenda," I said, my voice calm but carrying easily in the sudden silence, "we're not here to plead anything. We're here to discuss a rather more pressing matter of property ownership," Brenda scoffed. "Property ownership? We're about to own your property, darling, or at least a good chunk of it. The paperwork is already in motion to recoup our costs." This was it, the moment. I let a small, pitying smile touch my lips. "That's fascinating, Brenda. Especially since, before you proceed with any creative accounting regarding my ranch, we probably should address the rather significant issue of the land upon which this clubhouse, your rather lovely fuchsia pantsuit, and indeed this entire Willow Creek Estates development, is currently situated," she snapped. Sarah stepped forward, opening her briefcase. "What Mrs. Parker is referring to, Madam President, and members of the HOA," Sarah announced, her voice clear and authoritative, "is the inconvenient legal fact that the entirety of the land comprising the Willow Creek Estates development, as delineated in your own HOA plot maps, appears to be owned, fee simple, by Mrs. Breck Parker." She pulled out a large laminated copy of the original 1920s lease agreement, followed by the corresponding county survey map showing the Parker Ranch boundaries encompassing Willow Creek. This 99-year lease, granted by Mrs. Parker's great-grandfather, expired approximately 5 years ago. We can find no record of renewal, nor any record of the Parker family ever selling this parcel, which means, ladies and gentlemen, Sarah continued, her gaze sweeping the stunned room, that you are, regrettably, all trespassing. The silence in the room was absolute, thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, a collective gasp. Brenda's face, just moments before flushed with triumph, had gone a sickly shade of pale, clashing horribly with her fuchsia suit. That's preposterous," she stammered, her voice losing its assured tone. "Our developers, we have deeds." "Indeed, you have deeds," Sarah acknowledged smoothly. "Deeds that trace back to the original lessee, not to the Parker family who hold the underlying title. An expired leasehold interest, I'm afraid, does not magically transform into fee simple ownership." Then Sarah delivered the coup de grace. She calmly began to distribute copies of a single-page summary of the legal situation, along with individually addressed envelopes for Brenda and each member of the HOA board. "These," she announced, her voice ringing with quiet authority, "are formal notices to cease and desist trespassing on Mrs. Parker's land, and notices of intent to file for ejectment. You have 30 days to vacate the properties you currently occupy, or we will initiate legal proceedings to have you removed." The room erupted. Not in applause this time, but in a cacophony of shocked cries, angry shouts, and panicked whispers. Brenda looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The Queen had been dethroned, not just publicly, but catastrophically. Her entire kingdom, it turned out, was built on borrowed time, and the bill had just come due. The immediate aftermath was pure, unadulterated chaos. Brenda, her fuchsia ensemble now looking less powersuit and more clown costume, finally found her voice, a shrill, incoherent screech of denial and outrage. "This is a trick. A lie. Security! Get them out of here!" she shrieked, gesturing wildly. But the one part-time security guard present looked as bewildered as everyone else and wisely stayed put. Homeowners were on their feet, shouting questions, brandishing their own, now seemingly worthless deeds, demanding answers from the visibly crumbling HOA board. The timid treasurer looked like he was about to faint, and the puffed-up secretary was attempting to hide behind a potted fern. Sarah Chen, a beacon of calm in the storm, addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, I understand this is a shock. Mrs. Parker is not interested in causing undue hardship to innocent homeowners who were themselves misled. Her primary issue is with the HOA's egregious overreach and its current leadership." She paused, letting her gaze rest pointedly on Brenda. "We are prepared to discuss reasonable solutions for homeowners who wish to secure legitimate title or lease agreements directly with Mrs. Parker. However," her voice hardened, "the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, as an entity, and its board members who initiated this illegal action against Mrs. Parker's ranch will be held fully accountable." That distinction was crucial. My fight wasn't with the average resident, many of whom were probably decent people duped by aggressive developers and now a tyrannical HOA. My fight was with Brenda and the corrupt system she represented. Brenda, meanwhile, was having a full-blown meltdown. Her face was contorted, her expensive hairdo askew. She lunged towards the podium microphone, perhaps to rally her rapidly deserting troops, but tripped over a cable and went sprawling, her fuchsia pantsuit ending up in a most undignified heap. It was a moment of such perfect, self-inflicted humiliation that a few stunned titters actually broke through the panicked hubbub. In the days that followed, the Willow Creek Estates HOA effectively ceased to exist. Its authority, built on a foundation of legal quicksand, had vanished overnight. Brenda was, by all accounts, apoplectic and then abruptly silent, reportedly consulting with a series of increasingly expensive and pessimistic lawyers. The board members, faced with personal liability for trespass and potential damages, scattered like startled quail, most resigning immediately. The HOA's bank accounts were frozen, pending investigation into the legitimacy of their fines and assessments. It turned out Brenda had been running the HOA like her personal piggy bank for quite some time, a fact that other angry homeowners quickly started to uncover once the veil of her authority was lifted. My primary target, Brenda's ostentatious mansion built on prime Parker land with what I suspected were ill-gotten HOA funds siphoned into upgrades, was first on my list. Sarah Chen served her with a specific, non-negotiable 30-day eviction notice. There would be no deal-making for Brenda. She had tried to take my home and my heritage. She would lose hers, and publicly. The schadenfreude was, I admit, delicious. For the other homeowners, I took a different approach. I had no desire to evict hundreds of people. My goal was justice, not mass displacement. Through Sarah, I offered them two options. They could purchase the land their home stood on from me at its fair current, undeveloped, appraised value, a price far lower than what they'd paid for house and lot combined from the developers, or they could enter into new, fair, long-term land lease agreements directly with me, with transparent and reasonable terms, entirely bypassing any HOA structure. Most, after consulting their own attorneys and realizing the strength of my claim, opted to buy. It was a financial hit for some, but it gave them clear title and freedom from the HOA nightmare. A residents' cooperative quickly formed, not to govern with an iron fist, but to manage the purchase negotiations collectively and handle the shared infrastructure. Brenda's 30 days came and went. On the 31st day, when she was still defiantly in residence, the sheriff, armed with a court order for eviction that Sarah had efficiently secured, arrived at her McMansion. I wasn't there to see it, but Mrs. Henderson, bless her heart, gave me a full, gleeful report. Apparently, Brenda had to be physically escorted from the premises, still screeching about injustices and conspiracies, her Escalade, which, it turned out, was leased and soon repossessed, already gone. The contents of her house were inventoried and put into storage, pending her ability to pay for their removal. Last I heard, she was living in a cramped rental apartment in another county, facing multiple lawsuits from former HOA members for mismanagement of funds. Her reign of terror was definitively over. The Willow Creek Estates HOA was formally dissolved, its debts and dubious claims vanishing with it. The land, my land, was now either sold to the individual homeowners or under fair lease to them. The atmosphere in the neighborhood, according to Mrs. Henderson, transformed. People started talking to each other, planting gardens instead of just conforming to rigid landscaping rules, and generally enjoying their homes without fear of Brenda's next edict. My ranch remained untouched, quieter and more peaceful than ever. The old stone walls still stood, a testament to endurance. The wildflowers bloomed with impunity. I had not only defended my property, but had also, almost accidentally, liberated an entire community. So, that's the story of how an HOA president tried to steal my ranch and ended up homeless, while I inadvertently became the landlord of an entire subdivision. It turns out my grandfather was right. They had only borrowed it. And sometimes, when pushed too far, the quiet ones, the ones who just want to be left alone with their history and their land, are the ones you really need to watch out for. We have the patience to read the fine print. Brenda learned that lesson the hard way. Her expensive but tasteless attire is probably gathering dust in a storage unit somewhere, a fitting metaphor for her collapsed empire. As for me, I still enjoy my tea with Mrs. Probably Gathering Dust Henderson, who now has a rather flamboyant flock of plastic flamingos on her lawn, a joyful act of defiance against a tyranny that no longer exists. The world needs more such small rebellions. What's the craziest HOA story you've ever encountered? Or what would you have done in my situation? Drop a comment below, I'd love to hear it. And if you enjoyed this tale of entitlement getting its just desserts, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of when being polite just isn't enough. You never know when you might need a little inspiration for your own suburban warfare.